What happens when two of history's greatest minds, one a silent tactician from ancient China, the other a ruthless political thinker from Renaissance Italy, collide on the question of power? What if the art of war met the prince not as opposites, but as rival blueprints for mastering the world? In this journey, we'll dissect how Sun Tzu and Machiavelli shape their strategies around deception, human nature, ethics, and the very terrain of power itself. Is it better to win without fighting, or to dominate without apology? Should you build loyalty through virtue or fear? You're about to explore the philosophies that shaped emperors and rulers across centuries. Which one truly understands the soul of power, and which one understands its teeth? Let's begin. In understanding power, Sun Tzu and Machiavelli offer two fundamentally different lenses, both effective, but drawn from entirely different worldviews. Sun Tzu, writing over 2 millennia ago in The Art of War, approaches power as something deeply rooted in harmony. For him, the ideal general is not merely a tactician, but a sage, one who observes, listens, adapts, and seeks alignment with nature, the enemy's psychology, and the morale of his own troops. His strategies are not built on domination, but on reducing friction. Power, in this worldview, is a natural extension of balance. It emerges when the leader aligns intention with timing, force with necessity, and action with the unseen patterns in conflict. Sun Tzu famously claims, "The greatest victory is that which requires no battle." This is not weakness. It is the highest form of control, one where violence is rendered unnecessary because the opponent is outmaneuvered psychologically, politically, or structurally before swords ever clash. In contrast, Machiavelli, writing in the turbulent political theatre of Renaissance Italy, views power as something to be seized, controlled, and guarded with vigilance. In The Prince, his most controversial and influential work, Machiavelli doesn't romanticize leadership or cloak power in moral virtue. He cuts through the idealism of political philosophy with a scalpel. To him, power is not a product of harmony, but of calculated control. A ruler cannot afford to be loved more than feared. Loyalty based on virtue is too brittle. Instead, Machiavelli teaches that fear, carefully measured and not excessive, is a more reliable tool. He doesn't reject ethics altogether, but he subordinates them to the necessities of survival and stability. A prince must learn how not to be good, he writes, and to use this knowledge or not, according to necessity. In this, Machiavelli does not align with nature or virtue. He aligns with outcomes. While Sun Tzu emphasizes internal discipline, observation, and exploiting environmental and psychological factors, Machiavelli emphasizes deception, manipulation, and raw pragmatism. Sun Tzu's ideal ruler wins because his enemies collapse under their own miscalculations, demoralized and outmaneuvered. He creates so little resistance that the victory becomes a natural consequence. Machiavelli's prince, however, holds power through calculated appearances and the constant suppression of threats. Sun Tzu believes in achieving power with minimal force. Machiavelli believes force, when necessary, should be total and final. Sun Tzu avoids disorder by achieving inner and external harmony. Machiavelli embraces disorder if it serves as a tool for consolidating power. These approaches aren't merely cultural. They reveal opposing truths about how power operates in different conditions. Sun Tzu speaks to stable systems, where patience and clarity can prevail. Machiavelli speaks to volatile, shifting landscapes where survival itself is a form of war. And yet, both understand something deeply human: people follow strength. For Sun Tzu, strength is invisibly guided. For Machiavelli, it is visibly enforced. One uses soft control to avoid resistance, the other uses firm control to suppress it. Power, then, is not defined by a single truth, but by the context in which it is wielded. Sun Tzu offers a path of enlightened mastery, where control is maintained by becoming one with the current of events. Machiavelli offers a path of disciplined manipulation, where control is maintained by creating and managing the currents themselves. One dissolves the enemy, the other dominates him. And between them lies a central question: is power best maintained by cooperation with natural order, or by bending order to your will? This difference becomes even more evident when we examine how both thinkers treat the idea of deception, not just as a tactic, but as a governing principle of influence and survival. Both Sun Tzu and Machiavelli regard deception as a fundamental component of power, but they diverge in their treatment of its nature, scope, and purpose. For Sun Tzu, deception is a strategic tool designed to neutralize conflict before it begins. It is employed in service of clarity, control, and efficiency. In The Art of War, he writes, "All warfare is based on deception." But he does not celebrate deception as treachery. He celebrates it as psychological superiority. His deception is clean, elegant, and often invisible. It involves shaping perceptions, feeding misinformation, hiding strength, and disguising intent, all to confuse the enemy into making fatal mistakes. It is not about humiliating the opponent. It is about guiding them unknowingly into defeat, with minimal bloodshed and resistance. To Sun Tzu, deception is not morally reprehensible because it prevents unnecessary war. If your enemy believes you are far away when you are near, or weak when you are strong, they will act on that false belief. And if you have mastered that illusion, they will fall into your trap without either side having to resort to prolonged violence. His philosophy places the highest value on victory without fighting. Deception, then, is an art form that protects lives, maintains order, and wins through wisdom rather than destruction. Machiavelli, on the other hand, approaches deception with less reverence and more cold calculation. In The Prince, deception is not just a strategy of war, it is a strategy of rule. He sees deception as a permanent feature of political life, a necessary function of leadership. "Everyone sees what you appear to be," he writes. "Few experience what you really are." For Machiavelli, maintaining appearances is not a tactic, it is a survival mechanism. A prince must appear merciful, faithful, humane, and religious. Even if he is none of those things, appearances must be preserved because the public responds not to truth, but to image. Machiavellian deception is theatrical. It is not limited to misguiding enemies. It extends to allies, citizens, and rivals alike. It is embedded in governance itself. Machiavelli doesn't suggest deception as a temporary tool. He advocates for it as a necessary mask that rulers must wear indefinitely. Where Sun Tzu sees deception as a method of swift and precise victory, Machiavelli sees it as a continuous performance to secure and maintain authority. Their contrasting use of deception reflects their differing views on human nature. Sun Tzu assumes a level of rationality and discipline. His enemy is worthy of respect, and thus requires strategic misdirection, not personal manipulation. Machiavelli, however, views people as fundamentally unreliable, fickle, and selfish. He believes they are easily fooled, that they want to be fooled, and that a ruler who fails to deceive them will eventually be overthrown by someone who doesn't hesitate to do so. A wise ruler ought never to keep faith when it is against his interest. He writes, emphasizing that honesty, while admirable, is dangerous if applied universally. Despite these differences, both thinkers agree on one core point: the truth is not always useful. In politics and war, what matters most is perception. Victory and survival depend not on being right, but on being believed. Yet, while Sun Tzu uses deception to create harmony and avoid escalation, Machiavelli uses it to outmaneuver rivals in a continuous struggle for dominance. One masks strength to avoid war. The other masks intention to maintain power. Their philosophies, while both rooted in realism, split at the moral and strategic level. For Sun Tzu, deception is a refined art that complements strategic clarity. For Machiavelli, deception is the very language of power. And this divergence becomes even more visible when we examine how they understand human nature. Whether people are to be led through trust or manipulated through caution. Sun Tzu and Machiavelli offer sharply contrasting views on human nature, and these views shape their entire understanding of leadership, loyalty, and power. Sun Tzu, rooted in classical Chinese philosophy and the Taoist worldview, tends to assume that humans can be guided, elevated, and harmonized with proper leadership. His strategies revolve around understanding others, predicting their behavior not by assuming the worst, but by studying tendencies, motivations, and emotions. The commander, in Sun Tzu's framework, is not a manipulator of fear, but a reader of character. He sees the battlefield as psychological, emotional, and environmental. And so his role is to align the minds and spirits of his people toward a common, clear goal. Sun Tzu doesn't ignore the darker aspects of humanity: fear, ambition, and misjudgment. But he believes these can be anticipated and counterbalanced through discipline, timing, and moral leadership. The ideal general wins the loyalty of his troops not through caution, but through clarity of purpose, virtue, and consistent success. In The Art of War, he states, "Regard your soldiers as your children, and they will follow you into the deepest valleys. Look on them as your own beloved sons, and they will stand by you even unto death." This is leadership as trust building, where honor and shared values create cohesion. It is an optimistic, perhaps even idealistic, view of human potential within systems of command. In stark contrast, Machiavelli holds a deeply skeptical view of human nature. His model is built not on trust, but on predictably selfish behavior. In The Prince, he observes, men are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, and greedy. For him, this is not a condemnation. It's a fact of political life. Machiavelli believes that rulers who expect loyalty, virtue, or gratitude from their subjects or allies are naive and doomed to failure. Instead, he teaches that power must be maintained through foresight, fear, and carefully managed appearances. Loyalty is conditional. Allegiance is temporary. And people follow not because they are good, but because it is in their interest to do so. This fundamental cynicism leads Machiavelli to advocate for tools like fear, manipulation, and even cruelty, so long as they are applied strategically and without excess. It is much safer to be feared than loved, he famously writes. If you have to choose between the two. He does not suggest that rulers should be cruel for cruelty's sake, but that when power is at stake, moral expectations must yield to practical necessity. A ruler must always assume betrayal is possible, even likely, and should plan accordingly. Where Sun Tzu sees trust as a force multiplier, Machiavelli sees it as a liability unless reinforced by fear or vested interest. Their perspectives reflect the worlds they inhabited. Sun Tzu's China valued harmony, ritual, and philosophical reflection. His strategies are infused with the belief that systems can be stabilized, and that enlightened leadership can bring about order and loyalty. Machiavelli's Italy, meanwhile, was a fractured patchwork of city-states riddled with intrigue, assassination, and betrayal. In such a volatile environment, his realism, if not outright pessimism, was a survival strategy. His prince is not a moral leader, but a cunning player in a dangerous game. Yet both thinkers agree on one vital point in human behavior, is the true terrain of power. Whether you see people as redeemable or unreliable, predictable or irrational, your strategy must begin with understanding them. The difference lies in what you do with that understanding. Do you nurture loyalty, or do you guard against treachery? This divergence continues when we examine how each thinker balances ends and means. How far one should go in pursuit of victory, and whether restraint is a virtue or a weakness in the calculus of power. When it comes to balancing ends and means, Sun Tzu and Machiavelli stand on opposite ends of a philosophical battlefield. Their divergence is not simply tactical. It is moral, psychological, and profoundly revealing of their broader worldview. Sun places heavy emphasis on restraint, subtlety, and efficiency. For him, the path to victory should be as unintrusive as possible, and power should be exercised with minimal destruction. Machiavelli, on the other hand, believes that power must be preserved at any cost, and that noble ends can often justify even the most ruthless means. To Sun Tzu, restraint is wisdom. To Machiavelli, it is often dangerous naivety. Sun Tzu teaches that the most effective form of warfare is the one that doesn't require direct confrontation at all. The supreme art of war, he writes, is to subdue the enemy without fighting. This philosophy places the highest value on preservation of resources, of human lives, of political structures. A general's true brilliance is measured not by how thoroughly he annihilates an opponent, but by how completely he controls the situation without needless conflict. Even when force is used, it should be swift, precise, and proportionate. He sees unnecessary destruction as a sign of poor planning and weak leadership. Efficiency adaptability, and psychological dominance are preferred over brute strength. In this light, the end, victory, is only meaningful if it comes with stability, sustainability, and respect. Machiavelli, in contrast, does not shy away from violent or deceptive means if they serve the interests of the state. In The Prince, he repeatedly emphasizes that a ruler must be willing to violate conventional morality in pursuit of political survival. The ends justify the means is not a direct quote from Machiavelli, but it captures the spirit of his argument. He does not glorify cruelty or treachery for their own sake. Rather, he insists that a prince must be ready to use them when necessary. For Machiavelli, the preservation of the state is the highest good, and anything that threatens that must be neutralized, even if the methods are brutal. The prince who hesitates out of moral concern, he argues, may find himself overthrown, betrayed, or destroyed. This emphasis on pragmatism leads Machiavelli to advocate preemptive strikes, political assassinations, and strategic deceit. His examples, such as Cesare Borgia, highlight the use of fear, calculated violence, and opportunism. A ruler must act in ways that secure authority, even if those actions are condemned in public. Appearances matter, but the reality of power matters more. It is necessary for a prince to learn how not to be good, Machiavelli writes, and to use this knowledge as circumstances require. The end, continued rule, national unity, survival, becomes the moral compass. Where Sun Tzu seeks balance between ends and means, Machiavelli severs the two, seeing the end as sufficient justification in itself. Sun Tzu might say, "Win, but win clean." Machiavelli might respond, "Win or lose everything." One sees long-term harmony as the reward of restraint. The other sees short-term security as the only way to reach long-term control. Neither is naive. Both are realists, but their realism is colored by their faith, or lack thereof, in the system they serve and the people they rule. Their philosophies illuminate a core debate in leadership, politics, and warfare. Should leaders protect virtue, even when power is at risk? Or should they protect power, even if virtue must be sacrificed? Sun Tzu appeals to those who believe in sustainable, enlightened dominance. Machiavelli speaks to those who believe survival requires ruthlessness in a dangerous world. This divide becomes even sharper when we shift from battlefield and court to the broader landscape of power itself. When we compare their domains, war versus politics, their scope defines not just what they control, but how power operates in each domain. While both Sun Tzu and Machiavelli speak to the mechanics of power, the scope and terrain they address differ profoundly, shaping not only their advice, but their entire strategic frameworks. Sun Tzu writes as a military general. His battlefield is literal. Terrain, formations, discipline, morale. His strategies are forged in the context of armies, logistics, and statecraft during times of open conflict. His goal is victory in war, but war conducted with the grace and precision of a surgeon. Machiavelli, by contrast, writes not for generals, but for princes, statesmen, and rulers. His battlefield is the state itself. The court, the streets, the council chambers, the shifting allegiances of nobles, and the passions of the masses. If Sun Tzu speaks the language of war, Machiavelli speaks the dialects of governance and manipulation. Sun Tzu's vision of power is tactical and operational. It is situational, grounded in the movement of forces, the study of weather, the morale of troops, and the psychology of the enemy. He dissects how battles are won before they are fought. Through deception, surprise, and positioning. His terrain is visible and external. He concerns himself with understanding the enemy commander, the shape of the hills, the timing of the ambush. But beyond all this, his focus is on discipline, of self, of troops, and of execution. Power is harnessed and released precisely, like a drawn bow that only fires when the wind is right. Machiavelli, on the other hand, sees power as a constant, fluid struggle within society. His lessons are not designed for the battlefield, but for the throne room. His emphasis lies in how rulers rise, stay in power, and suppress internal threats. He focuses on inheritance, acquisition, public image, factionalism, and fear. His battlefield is one of invisible forces: gossip, rumor, betrayal, ambition, envy, and civil unrest. Power in Machiavelli's world is never stable. It must be actively maintained through a balance of cruelty and compassion, force and finesse. Where Sun Tzu's enemy is an opposing army, Machiavelli's enemy may be a trusted advisor, a scheming noble, or a restless mob. This difference in scope shapes their style of thinking. Sun Tzu emphasizes withdrawal, ambush, and concealment, not only as military tactics but as metaphors for life. His universe favors the indirect, the elegant, the efficient. Machiavelli, however, is more surgical and political. He favors swift moves that consolidate power, punish opposition, and send clear signals to both allies and enemies. Sun Tzu suggests that true strength is invisible and flows with the natural order. Machiavelli contends that true strength is visible, carefully choreographed, and brutally efficient when required. Even in their literary tone, the difference is striking. Sun Tzu writes in brief, almost poetic aphorisms, parables of strategy that invite contemplation. Machiavelli writes in direct, grounded prose, addressing his reader like a counselor advising a ruler in real time. Sun Tzu's world assumes that war is a part of life, but not the highest ideal. Machiavelli assumes that politics is war by other means, and that ruling is a continual state of conflict, requiring perpetual readiness. This contrast teaches a larger truthing, while Sun Tzu prepares us for moments of crisis and conflict. Machiavelli prepares us for the constant tension of power in society. One trains the mind for decisive battle. The other trains the will for a lifetime of negotiation, manipulation, and control. Together, their visions offer a complete panorama of power, its moments of collision and its seasons of subtlety. And when viewed side by side, they force us to ask, are we fighting a war? Or are we simply trying to survive the politics of life? Their wisdoms are not mutually exclusive, but rather two halves of the same strategic coin. And perhaps the greatest strategist is not the one who chooses between them, but the one who can move seamlessly from battlefield to palace, blending Sun Tzu's harmony with Machiavelli's cunning, mastering both the sword and the crown. In the end, Sun Tzu and Machiavelli do not cancel each other out. They complete each other. One whispers through the patterns of nature. The other speaks through the iron logic of necessity. One teaches you how to move like water, the other how to strike like lightning. True mastery of power may not lie in choosing between them, but in knowing when to listen to each. When the winds shift, when alliances fray, when silence is louder than speech or cruelty, more effective than kindness. It is the strategist who understands both harmony and cunning who prevails. Power is not a single road, it is a shifting terrain. And those who walk it with both the grace of Sun Tzu and the nerve of Machiavelli do not just survive. They shape history.